Charlotte, how big a turnout is expected there?
Well, they're hoping that thousands of people will turn up here to Hyde Park. There's a peace rally this afternoon. There's going to be bands and speeches, and endorsements are expected from David Cameron and Gordon Brown. But it all started off this morning with two separate marches, one in North London, one in South London. Yes, well, this is the road where Boris Levy was attacked, and this is the club where he went for help. The doorman here tried to help him. They called an ambulance and they called the police. Unfortunately, nobody was able to save his life. Thanks. Yes, well, the situation is better for most of us today, but it's still not back to normal. Many roads closed because of black ice, including this one, the A1081, just south of Luton. If you take a look at the fields over here, you can see they're still thick with snow. Well, it's been worse up in Northamptonshire. If you take a look at these pictures, you can see more problems on the roads and the pavements, which sadly are rarely gritted.
Charlotte Fisher is outside Jade's home in Essex Forest this lunchtime. So any sign of Jade so far, Charlotte?
Yes, she left the house here at about 8:20 this morning, accompanied by her bridesmaids. She seemed in very good spirits and she walked to the car. Her bridesmaids were dressed in tracksuits and false bald heads in sympathy with Jade. And since she left, we understand she's gone down to the dentist in London. There's been a steady stream of flowers here from friends and well-wishers.
And Charlotte, what can we expect for the big ceremony tomorrow?
Well, in many ways, of course, a typical celebrity wedding, 150 guests, champagne, country house hotel in Hatfield Heath. But the difference is how long Jade will be able to spend at the ceremony, and some people think that could be as little as 15 minutes. It's a race the whole country has been watching, just willing Lewis Hamilton to win. He's the first British driver to win the World Championship in 12 years. The last one was Damon Hill in 1996, and of course, aged 23, he's also the youngest driver ever to win the World Championship in the history of Formula One. I think the thing is the change in attitude. I don't know if you remember seeing the women's four crying because they got a silver medal and they desperately wanted gold. It seems taking part, even doing well, isn't enough anymore. People really are going for gold. This, as you say, is just a rehearsal. The real thing is tomorrow. And this light show traces the 800 years of the university, illustrating the ideas and innovations that have come out of Cambridge in that time. And I spent the day looking at some of those ideas and some of the people that the university has nurtured who have gone on to leave their mark on the world. It's thought the explosion was caused by an overheated gas canister, and you can see by the damage to the walls just how ferocious the heat must have been. Over here, Jan's suede jacket has just melted away. Today, his 93-year-old grandmother, who has hearing problems, asked me to phone the burns unit and find out how Jan's was doing. He's not conscious because he's being sedated.
Yeah.
Jan's is stable but remains in intensive care.
I was prepared for that already when I saw his hands, because they were white and his face was like a mask.
The living legend that is Michael Parkinson.
Veteran chat show host Sir Michael Parkinson has been on the receiving end of Jonathan Ross's humour himself. A former guest on Ross's Friday night show, now pulled from the schedules for 3 months while Ross is suspended without pay. Punishment for his part in the prank phone calls to Andrew Sachs. Today, Sir Michael gave his verdict on Ross and Russell Brand.
Jonathan was his head testing, basically. I mean, he's 48 years of age, he's a grown man, a mature man, and an intelligent man, so he must have known what he was getting into.
But do you think that Jonathan Ross should keep his job?
Yes, I think so. I think Jonathan's got a lot to offer broadcasting. I think that it will have affected his career, having said that.
Like Ross, Russell Brand has apologised to Andrew Sachs and his granddaughter. He's also resigned from Radio 2.
We did the honourable thing, but I think it was ahead of the chop, don't you? There's no way the BBC could have employed him after that. I mean, it was not just a grotesque lapse of taste. It was beyond that, actually. It was foolhardy in the extreme.
The BBC is promising tighter editorial controls. Sir Michael says they're certainly needed, but questions the BBC's wisdom in hiring Russell Brand in the first place. Charlotte Fisher, ITV News. Drug dealer Miran Thakrar slaughtered 2 men and a teenager and stabbed 2 women, leaving them for dead. Hours later, he fled Britain for northern Cyprus, caught here on security cameras at Heathrow with his girlfriend Amanda Dancy, who helped him escape. Keith Cowell and his 17-year-old son Matthew were gunned down at their home in Bishop Stortford last August, along with a friend, Tony DeLue. A revenge attack for a drugs deal that went wrong. 24-year-old Miran Thakrar and his younger brother Kevan from Stevenage have been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder.
42 years is a long time.
Is it long enough?
No, nothing is long enough. My brother was 17, you know. In 42 years he might have had a family, been married. He certainly would have had some kind of a life, and that's been taken from him. And he has been taken from us, as has my dad, and 42 years doesn't even come close.
The court heard Miran used a Mac-10 machine gun like this, spraying the living room with bullets and shooting each man several times. The jury at St Albans Crown Court was told that Miran then turned his attentions to Keith's sister, 54-year-old Christine Jennings, shooting her once before his machine gun ran out of bullets. Kevan Thakrar then tried to stab her to death, while Miran went upstairs to where Claire Evans was and repeatedly stabbed her, while she tried to protect her 3-year-old child.
The death penalty is about taking a living human being, putting him in a 6-foot cage, and keeping him there for 15 years before you kill him.
Michael Lambrix has been on death row all his adult life. He's been sentenced to die in the electric chair for killing a young couple in southern Florida in 1983.
Living here isn't really living here, because you don't live, you exist, and you take it one day at a time.
At the moment, there are 371 men and 4 women on death row in Florida. Around 50 of them are held here at the Florida State Prison. This is the most secure unit in the state. Having 3 children at 3 different schools is a particular challenge for Jane Francis and her family. And living in rural Hertfordshire, the car is an essential part of the school run. The round trip is 21 miles, twice a day, which uses a lot of fuel.
Diesel has gone up at least 15 pence a litre, and it was already costing us about 100 quid a month, and now it's another £20 a month on top of that.
It seems like a distant memory, but 5 years ago the average price of a litre of petrol was a mere 75.8 pence, a litre of diesel 2 pence more. Now the average litre of petrol costs £1.12.6, diesel more than £1.24. And it's still going up. So why has fuel gone sky high? Well, the price of crude oil has doubled in less than a year. It's all about supply and demand. The demand has massively increased, particularly in Asia, but the supply hasn't kept pace. Other people blame speculators, people betting that the price of oil will continue to rise. Whatever the reason, this is the result. And while fuel goes up, cab drivers' fares are fixed.
Basically, we've got to put in an extra couple of hours per day just to make ends meet.
This is the worst increase since 1973, when oil prices quadrupled. OPEC reduced production and forecourts here ran dry. Everyone tried to cut consumption. The Luton mayor downsizing from a Daimler. So is there anything we can do to reduce the pain? Well, with me is Kevin Delaney from the Institute of Advanced Motoring. Kevin, any ideas?
Yeah, simple things. Start with the roof rack. If you've got roof bars or a top box and you don't need them, then take them away. They will add to your fuel consumption. Right. Next, drive with your windows closed, and unless it's very hot, don't use your aircon.
If it is hot, aircon or windows open?
Aircon then.
Okay.
Finally, check your tyre pressures. If your tyre pressures are too low, you will use more fuel and your tyres won't last as long.
Okay, what about during the journey?
During the journey is relatively simple. Don't be in a hurry and don't exceed the speed limit. If you're doing 70 miles an hour, you're using something like 15% less fuel than if you're trying to do 80.
But some are already abandoning their cars. Packing up for a weekend break, the Francis family will be stopping at the station and taking the train instead. Charlotte Fisher, Anglia News. It's a race the whole country was watching. willing Lewis Hamilton to win. And despite the nail-biting last few laps, he didn't disappoint. At 23, becoming the youngest world champion in the history of Formula One. Damon Hill was the last British driver to win in '96. Today he watched his successor as he nearly threw the race away.
We all went up and down in the space of 20 seconds with emotions here in the BRDC clubhouse, and he put us through it and everyone else watching. It was amazing.
At Rye House in Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire, this race was personal. Lewis Hamilton started his career here 15 years ago.
He was something else, and really his family must be so over the moon.
He's a great ambassador for the sport and for the country, so well done, Lewis.
Hamilton was 8 when his dad bought him his first go-kart. By the time he was 10, he'd won his first national championship. 11-year-old Connor Jupp is the current title holder.
It means a lot to me because I've won the British Championship like he did when he was karting, so really good.
Hamilton certainly isn't short of fans.
I think the whole country is thrilled by his exceptional talent, and the whole of Britain is now congratulating him and proud of the inspirational achievement of Lewis and the McLaren team.
It's the second year in a row that Hamilton's kept his fans on a knife edge. This time, though, it was the ending everyone wanted. Charlotte Fisher, ITV News, Hoddesdon. One area which has seen huge improvements in technology and expertise over the years is neonatal care. Babies born early now have a far greater chance of survival.
If the babies are taken straight into neonatal intensive care, they can survive as early as 23 or 24 weeks.
Many hospitals have special care baby units, but there are only 3 in the eastern region that have intensive care units for newborn babies, in Luton, Cambridge and Norfolk. Well, Charlotte Fisher has been spending a day at the Luton and Dunstable Hospital.
Kate and Daniel Barron's twins arrived almost 3 months early at 29 weeks. Chloe weighed just under £3 and Henry £2 13 ounces. They're now in intensive care at the Luton and Dunstable Hospital.
I can't put into words how grateful I am. Because they're just, you know, they're amazing little babies and they're doing so well, and without the help of all the staff, they wouldn't be here.
But Kate already had good reason to be grateful to medical staff here.
When I was 14, I had an appendicitis, and then 2 months later had plastic surgery to my cleft lip, and then about a month after that they found out that I had a brain tumour. So I was, had a major operation, 9-hour operation to remove that. And again, the doctors and nurses were just fantastic. I do have, quite a lot of experience of the NHS, but it's just all positive.
1 in 10 babies now spends time in a neonatal unit, but their care has changed dramatically since the NHS began.
60 years ago, neonatal care probably involved keeping a baby warm in a primitive incubator, feeding it as little and often, and babies survived if they were lucky. But it was unusual to survive much younger than about 30 weeks into pregnancy. Nowadays we have babies who will survive at 24 weeks.
Neonatal care improves all the time, but it is expensive. It costs £1,000 a day to keep a baby in intensive care. 20 years ago, when Nazreen Lewis became a neonatal nurse, there were few machines and monitors, but they play a vital part in keeping these babies alive.
When I came, I think there were probably about 3 or 4 ventilators, but only one type of ventilator. Now we deliver different modes of ventilation and specialised treatment.
And of course it's improved the survival rates dramatically.
Yes.
I do have a particular interest in neonatal care because my daughter was born at 28 weeks, and that means she was in an intensive care unit like this one for 2 weeks and then spent 3 months in hospital.
That was 4 years ago, and even in that time, survival rates have increased, particularly for babies born at 24 and 25 weeks gestation. Francesca weighed only £2.11 when she was born, but thanks to the care she received in hospital, she's now a normal, healthy 4-year-old. This is another change, parents being involved.
Any time, day or night, yeah, you can come down and see him.
But things were very different when Leanne herself was born.
Well, when Leanne came down for it, I wasn't allowed to come down. I didn't see her until the following day.
Attitudes as well as technology have been revolutionised in the last few decades, but both have made neonatal care one of the major success stories of the NHS. Charlotte Fisher, Anglia News, Luton and Dunstable Hospital.
What Charlotte failed to mention is that her daughter, who needed neonatal care, is now a total beauty and gives her mother completely the runaround.
She does indeed.
Which brings joy to our office when they all come in.
It's wonderful, isn't it, to see what they can do with
Incredible.
those babies.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Gardening is one of Peter Hart's hobbies, although as one of Britain's longest surviving heart transplant patients, he's careful not to overdo it.
Well, I had a bypass the year before, which failed after 2 months, I think. They told me that the only thing they could do for me was a transplant. The only hope I had was a transplant. Lucky enough, I got accepted by Papworth. I went there on the April for assessment, and I got a transplant on June the 2nd. One of the surgeons, I'm sure, said to me I should get 3 years, extra life.
And how long ago was that?
That was 26 years ago.
How do you feel about Papworth now?
Marvellous.
Papworth had only been doing heart transplants for 3 years. Sir Terence English carried out the UK's first successful heart transplant in 1979. In 1984, John Walworth carried out the first successful heart and lung transplant. And in 2006, the UK's first beating heart was transplanted here. But in the early days, many people felt transplants were a waste of time and money.
Of the first 6 cases we did at Papworth, 4 of them lived between 3 and 8 years. And so we were lucky with that, because it meant that you know, I was convinced by that time that there was a future for transplantation.
In fact, transplantation is only a small proportion of the work carried out at Papworth. Gary Ambrose has an irregular heartbeat. He's having non-invasive surgery, a catheter ablation, for the 2nd time.
Not painful, not at all painful now, just a long process, about 4.5 hours last time.
And you're awake for quite a bit of it?
Awake for that time, yeah. They don't put you out at all.
But this time, Papworth surgeons are using pioneering technology, which should be more effective and cut the operating time in half.
We've essentially passed wires into the heart and looked at the electrical recordings within the heart to see where the triggers for this rhythm problem are originating, and then we go about doing what's called a catheter ablation, where we burn away these triggers to try and prevent the rhythm coming back.
Keith Easter was one of the first NHS patients here almost 60 years ago. Of course, today Papworth's known for its pioneering heart and lung surgery, but why were you brought here?
I was brought here because I had tuberculosis. I came in 1949, when I was 19 years old. I came here, I had treatment, had what they call an AP, when they used to collapse your lung. And within 9 months I was, come out and started work, went to live in one of these little huts and started work up in the kitchen gardens.
Some of the treatments of TB were surgical. We used to take people's ribs out and put ping-pong balls in the chest. And those surgeons were the ones that then became heart surgeons. So quite a lot of old TB units then became heart surgical units.
And this one has become one of the best known in the world. Charlotte Fisher, Anglia News, Papworth.
Our plan is a service which will provide the best medical advice and treatment for everyone, every man, woman and child in this country. Whatever your income, if you want to use this service, there'll be no charge for treatment.
At 1 minute past midnight on July the 5th, 1948, the National Health Service came into being, the cornerstone of the Labour government's commitment to rebuild Britain after 6 years of war. Dr. Kenneth Clemenson became a surgical registrar almost exactly as the NHS was born, moving to the Memorial Hospital in Peterborough 3 years later.
The main thing was, of course, that hospital patients were no longer charity patients, and therefore they could say what they wanted. They weren't just there to be told what was going to happen to them. They did have some say in their treatment.
The total spent on each person was 12.5 pence. These days it's £1,800. The most common reasons for being admitted were injuries and fractures. The average stay was 10 to 14 days. Patients with infectious diseases such as TB and scarlet fever needed to stay in hospital to stop the disease spreading. In England and Wales, there were 480,000 NHS hospital beds. Today, heart attacks and strokes have joined fractures as the most common reason for admission, and the number of beds has declined to 140,000 as day surgery increases and more treatments done by GPs and physiotherapists. In 1948, there were 125,000 nurses. They had to live in the nurses' home and wore blue and white striped dress uniforms, starched aprons and caps. Rank was denoted by different coloured belts. Matrons was black. They were trained on the job. Today, there are around 600,000 nurses. Most wear trousers and a tunic, and the hat is long gone. The nurse's role is denoted by the uniform colour chosen by each individual hospital, and they're now trained at university. Dr. Brian Silk, who came to Kettering Hospital in 1962, says training is now better for all staff.
The old adage was in surgery was something like read one, see one, do one. That was a caricature, but it was based on fact. The other big... Now there's proper training. There are proper training programs, and people have to be assessed regularly as they go through the training. And at the end of a shorter period of time, you get fully trained, experienced doctors.
Does that mean that patients are getting better treatment now?
Undoubtedly.
Medication was supposed to be free, but by 1952, the NHS was forced to introduce fees. The first prescription cost 1 shilling. Now prescriptions cost £7.10 per item. The most common include the pill, antidepressants and antibiotics. So that's the NHS, which today employs 1.3 million people, making it one of the world's largest employers, along with the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the Indian Railways and Walmart's supermarket chain. Charlotte Fisher, Anglian News.